Good afternoon. My name is Chris Adlam with Youth Pledge for Employers, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Poole, the Animal Manager at the Zoological Society of East Anglia. Hello, Dan.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for giving me your time this afternoon, and I'm sort of glad to get that mouthful of a job title out of the way. But I mean, I guess my first start of a 10 question has to be, okay, what does an animal manager for the Zoological Society of East Anglia do?
Okay, so my role kind of encompasses many things now. So essentially, on a daily basis, I am responsible for the animal team here at Africa Alive Zoological Reserve. So obviously that filters down through. So we have some team leaders who run sort of the individual teams across the site. So we've got 3 of those at Africa Alive. They have their immediate deputies, and then it sort of filters down through the ranks. So I'm kind of less on the ground animal base now. I don't go out and do too much in the enclosures, but more about sort of the overall management of the whole department as such. So anything from, helping the guys make sure things are done in the appropriate way within the enclosures, helping them source new diets or looking at animal transactions, all of that kind of stuff kind of now falls into my role rather than just being out there with the animals.
That's a really good oversight, and forgive the sort of ignorance in this kind of question, but like if you ask me to sort of draw up a career path of how you become an animal manager in that kind of role, I wouldn't even know where to start. So as you say, I know you said you spend less time sort of in the conservation. So can you just give us a little summary of sort of how you came to be sort of working in this role in this sort of field?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a few different routes into sort of this line of work, so zookeeping. My route in was through an apprenticeship. So I got an apprenticeship when I was just about 18 years old, and it was a 12-month contract and fixed term, basically just designed to give you a small qualification and a bit of work experience. And then from that point on, in theory, make it easier for you to enter the zoo industry because it is quite competitive. So that was my route in. Very luckily, at the end of my apprenticeship, I got kept on as a trainee keeper, and then I've worked through the ranks over the years, going through every sort of single step that Z as a collection kind of has. Obviously, the titles vary a little bit across the zoo industry, but within Zoological Society of East Anglia, we have apprentices currently, then trainees, then qualified keepers, senior keepers, deputy team leaders, and then myself. So I've kind of gone through all of those different positions. But other ways you can get in, and it's quite common, is that people will go to university, study animal behaviour, conservation, zoology, any of those kind of things, and then come into the zoo world from there, maybe often as a trainee, because at that point the apprenticeship qualification is kind of outweighed by your degree as such. And then other good ways in is just volunteering in general, just going down to your local collection, giving a bit of time, showing the team what you're about. You'll then obviously hear about opportunities and internships at other collections and things, often a good ways in for people to start this sort of career path.
No, thank you. That's a brilliant summary of the routes, and I do want to keep this, chat as career focused as possible. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious about the kind of animals you work with and the kind of things you do. Because obviously, for a lot of people, this will be like, they will probably think this is sort of like a dream career path, and the kind of thing that, to be honest, they will probably think, as you say, it's a competitive industry. They'll probably think, what, the odds of me probably getting to that kind of field, are very, very slim. So the 2 questions I have to ask for you, one very professional, one not professional. The not professional one is, what kind of animals have you worked with, and what ones have been the challenging ones, and what ones have you really enjoyed working with? And the second part of that question is, if the field is so competitive, what kind of traits and qualities is someone going to need to sort of, to be above the rest to get into those competitive roles?
Okay, I'll start with a professional one because then we can do the more fun one. So qualities and traits and things that would be sort of desirable in this industry is obviously your real basic ones. Do you like working outside? Do you mind getting cold, wet? Do you mind working weekends? Do you mind working unsociable hours? Do you mind working bank holidays? Christmas, people are still here on Christmas Day. So yeah, you've got to have a passion for conservation, animals, education. You want to be able to, connect people to those animals. All those kind of things would be really desirable traits. And like I said, an ability to be smiling because you're still out with your animals during a snowstorm, you know. So that's kind of where I would say, you know, like a passion for conservation, because if you haven't got that, when it does get wet, when it does get windy, your enjoyment of this job is going to go downhill, because it is a great job. For anyone that has a passion for animals and conservation, you don't have a job when you're in this industry. It's like having a hobby for 40 hours a week. It's absolutely brilliant. And animals that I've worked with, so over the years, I've worked with quite a lot of species, in particular across Zoological Society of East Anglia. I've worked with almost everything that we have across both collections, from you know, your sea lions to your big cats to your birds and your primates, your bigger and your smaller primates. I often find some keepers, you know, like everything, some will find a niche. For myself, I would say my higher interest is around sort of carnivores. I really like my big cats and things like that. But that has changed as I've sort of developed through my career. In my very early days, I was the giraffe keeper, and I would have sat here and told you now that I never want to work with anything else other than hoof stock. I love hoof stock. And then I went on to primates for a little while, and that kind of changed again, and that passion kind of expands again into something else, and then a bit of birds, and everything has got its sort of individual character, you know. Dealing with giraffe is very different to dealing with birds. You're not chopping diets into tiny little pieces, not bending down on your hands and knees to get tiny little bits of cleaning done under branches and stuff. But again, it has its perks, you know. So I think providing you're passionate about conservation, you will find something to enjoy on everything. But you will get people sort of hone in on particular skills. You know, there's people that love their birds slightly more than everything else, and you've got to use that skill set to your advantage, because, like I said earlier, your passion's kind of what's going to drive you on to make improvements in them areas and keep focused.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And just out of curiosity, if you do develop a specialism, so as you say, whether it is specifically for carnivores, big cats or something, is there any additional sort of training or qualifications that are required to work with specific species in specific conditions? Or is it very much where if you get the experience and you enjoy it, you can just carry on working with that particular species?
Within reason, a lot of it is experience sort of dependent. So each collection, each charity, each zoo will have their own idea of where those parameters lie. But obviously your big cats and some of your larger hoof stock and things, they carry, you know, there is more risk with working with those animals. So you might be slightly further into your career maybe when you start that process, again depending on the collection. As for training, obviously we kind of, again, it'll be individual for each zoo, but you'll have your sort of training plan set out of the things that you want to sign people off on to say that they're competent to work with those animals, and they understand the sort of the husbandry requirements, the safe operating procedures, and all those kind of things involved around those animals. As for sort of additional training, we do offer sort of career development and things, and if people have particular focus, obviously we'd like to try and tailor it around that. So there's different sort of memberships and associations and stuff. So ABWAC is one, BIAZA, EAZA, and these are all sort of big associations that are developed to sort of help the zoo industry, essentially. So people can sign up for courses or express an interest in courses, and we can obviously try and facilitate that. I wouldn't say like some of the training is a necessity to work with individual species. If you are in the right collection and the species are there and you can sort of show an interest in stuff, you might be lucky enough to get into those animals. I do think, you know, additional work, obviously through the company, which would be good, offering you the right career development, but also independently. You know, I do a lot of independent courses myself. Even a lot of them are free. You can go online and find a webinar about, you know, carnivore diets, for example. That might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if that's your interest, won't mind sitting for an hour and a half, and you can sign up to sort of ABWAC and things, which are relatively cheap for what they offer, and then attend a 2-day conference on giraffe if you like, and meet like-minded people, and, you know, expand your knowledge of that, which is only going to help you specialize at a later date, because you're obviously going to have that background.
No, that's really, really interesting. And I want to go back actually to a point you made a little while ago, which is you touched on the sort of educational requirements in this sort of field. I want to say that a lot of people might, how to put it, they might love the idea of working outside and working with animals, actually, maybe because it means they spend less time working with people. And how do I put it? If when it comes to maybe, as say, whether it's, and you tell me, but whether it's working with school trips or simply working with colleagues who are much more experienced than yourselves, how much is sort of the ability to communicate and to educate, how important is that sort of when you're working in these kind of roles?
I think obviously people that tend to sort of be drawn to working with animals maybe sometimes don't want to work with people as such. I think that's at least the stigma that sort of surrounds animal work anyway, is you do that because you don't want to work with people. I think in this industry, like everything that underpins a good zoo is conservation, education, research. So if you want to sort of work in this industry, there is an element of education that you are going to have to sort of take on. So whether that's talking to public enclosures, doing keeper talks, doing experiences, doing school groups coming in and doing different sort of camps and things that are laid out for them, and us helping facilitate that, you are going to be involved. Again, it will depend on the collection that you work at, because here at Z we have an education team, so they're the ones that kind of take the brunt of the school groups. They take the sort of animal talks, all those kind of things. So keepers don't have to always do the formal education, because obviously that's a whole nother skill set as well. We will be involved, but I think if you don't want to interact with people at all, zoo work is probably going to be a bit challenging, because obviously a lot of what we do involves interacting with the public. But again, like I said earlier, when you're passionate about something, you will find it easier to talk about those kind of things, because especially with the visitors in a zoo, they're so excited to be here. Everything you say is like exciting and fascinating to them. So it's very easy to have a conversation with public around the park and spread the message of what we're trying to do.
No, that's really, really interesting. And actually, I think it links quite nicely onto the next question I was going to ask. Because to say, you talk about the people coming in, people being excited, and obviously they only see like maybe a small part of a typical day. And I know there's no such thing as a typical day within any industry, but I'm still going to ask you about it anyway. So this question will come in two parts, really. One, if you sort of had to summarize a typical day within a couple of the roles you've sort of spoken about there, and the second part of the question being, if you were to talk through about some of the challenges, so you've spoken about, are people prepared to, to do the cold, wet days, do the unsociable hours? Can you tell us a bit more maybe about the challenges, that, as I say, are sort of faced in zoological roles, and actually then what the rewards are? What are the good days? What are the moments when you go, this is what I'm in my job for?
Absolutely. So obviously, typical day for most of us involved in the zoo industry would be coming in, collecting your sort of animal feeds for the day, liaising with a team over what the jobs you would like to achieve that day are, and then often you'll have each team will sort of be broken down into sections. So you'll have maybe one keeper to look after these 3 enclosures, for example. So everyone will kind of go off about their day, check all their animals nice and early. Feeds might be distributed out. There'll be some cleaning done, maybe some training, some enrichment, and then making feeds for later in the day or the next day. Obviously, veterinary care is a big thing in zoos. We'll have the vets come round very regularly, whether that's just to have a walk around and discuss an animal. This animal's kind of getting quite old now. Is there anything we want to do as preventative measures? It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's just to look at, look at this training. We can now examine that animal's teeth. Would you like to come and have a look? Or all those kind of things. So the day, obviously, like I say, there's a basic routine, which is obviously everything needs to be checked. Everything needs to be seen as to be healthy. Everything needs to be enriched so that they're not just sat in an enclosure with nothing to do. And obviously, you've got to be prepared for your next days with your feeds and deliveries and all that kind of stuff. But a lot around that will change daily as to when that happens and what time that works, and have you got an animal experience with a guest that day. So it's a very fluid system, but as long as the core foundations are done, it's fine. You can kind of make the day up as you go along. challenges are obviously, you know, weather is a big thing for us. Wind in particular, when you've got trees around the park and stuff, you've got to make sure you're on it with that so that no enclosures are at risk. Rain, the cold in particular, some animals obviously need temperature ranges within certain parameters, and our British winter may not fulfill that. Even the British summertime might put it out the other end sometimes. So we're always kind of making sure those kind of things are maintained. You know, in the ice, if your water drinkers are getting a bit frozen, or, you know, you're picking up poo in -5, it's they're pretty challenging times sometimes. And often, like we say, animals are unpredictable. Things go unplanned sometimes. You know, animals might have an injury or have a sort of a spate of illness, or you know, unexpected tension within the group that you hadn't foreseen, and you've now got to come up with a new plan to make sure everyone is happy, and, you know, you've sort of dissolved this tension that's happened as best you can. But the rewards of, you know, like you say, you do have tough days, but the rewards of that are when you sort of have a training project, for example, and you achieve a new goal, and it's all voluntary with the animal, or you put out some new enrichment and they interact with it brilliantly, and you can see that you've made a significant difference to that animal's day, or you have a new birth that is really important for a breeding program or conservation project. You know, all of that completely outweighs the day that you've stood in the rain.
Yeah, no, I think that's a brilliant summary, and I think, as you sort of said there, I think you need to have that passion and that belief in what you're doing, and achieving those results to, as you say, sort of to get you through the standing in the wind and standing in the rain. You know, and I guess you actually in these roles, I guess you probably do need to have quite a thick skin at times, especially maybe sort of being, as I say, being a sort of public facing as well, and you know, anything to do with any kind of sort of you know, sort of animal welfare. I guess there's always a lot of eyes on you, if you see what I mean. So sort of, you know, do you think that's quite a true thing to say? You need to sort of, as I say, be aware of these things, and, as I say, have a thick skin, or?
I think so. I mean, and rightly so. There is a lot of animal sort of activists, and they need to be there. You know, animal interest needs to be protected, and there are what I would like to call like modern good zoos. You know, there are also people that maybe aren't following the right path. So I think these people do have and groups and have a place to try and help keep everybody on track. But I think you do have to have a thick skin, because regardless of what you do, sometimes obviously you will come under scrutiny. And I would like to say here at ZSEA that we are a modern zoo, we are a good zoo, we are doing everything for the right reason. And obviously you've just got to believe in that and ensure that you are following the sort of correct path down the good modern zoo route. And then things will be said, but you can at least take some comfort in the fact that you know that you're doing the right thing and you're doing the best thing you can. Because ultimately, like, I don't think any zookeeper would sit here and say to you they want zoos to exist, because in an ideal world we wouldn't need to be conserving species because there was habitat loss or poaching, but zoos are a necessity, and if they're a necessity, you may as well make sure you're a really good one.
Yeah.
And you're here for a purpose, and that purpose is to obviously educate the public, connect with communities, connect people with nature, do research on things such as breeding patterns, maybe, so that you can help explore why things aren't going quite right in the wild, and obviously do the conservation, be involved in breeding programs so that there is a viable captive population for if things continue to deteriorate in the wild or improve, and we can go to release. So yeah, like I love zoos, and I think they have a real strong place in society. I can understand why people would like them not to exist, but in this day and age, you know, they have to, if we want to see these species survive.
I think it's a really important point you've actually hit on there, is that anyone sort of going into these kind of roles and, you know, into this industry, how do I put it, you need to have, as you say, sort of oversight of the bigger picture there of, you know, why you're doing what you're doing, what you want to achieve. You know, you're sort of not just in the role because you want to spend time working with the animals. You know, as you say, you're sort of, you know, you're doing this for the bigger picture, as you say, so to ensure that these animals are around for longer periods of time, to ensure that environments are sustained, and and as I say, that maybe just because you think that particular animal looks quite cute, or you want to be around that one, that's not quite going to be enough.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a lot more to it that, like you say, maybe on the surface people don't see it. Yeah. Obviously, I love being around animals and things, and that was part of the draw to kind of go into this industry, is to be around these amazing creatures. But that isn't enough, to sustain you in this career for a long time. And it isn't enough to push this industry in the right direction either. We need people that are sort of visionaries as such, that are going to try and keep pushing it in the modern good route.
This is sort of touching on what you said earlier when you were talking about the different routes. Obviously, you spoke about the route about sort of volunteering, getting the practical experience, and trying to get qualified from there, or going for a university route. If someone is if they're a little bit younger and they're not they've got those routes in mind, but they're maybe not at age yet, so maybe say they're sort of 16, 17, yeah. What other things do you think they could be doing? What sort of can they be doing in their spare time? What can they be putting on their CV, if you see what I mean? What kind of things can they be doing to sort of help them get that little bit of an edge, so that when they do get to those ages where they can start, as I say, applying for experience or going to university, that will give them an edge?
I think work placements are a big thing. Obviously work experience is still part of the schooling in the later years. College courses and stuff will have work experience placements. I think it's really important to try and use those to your advantage, whether that is at a zoo or not, because obviously there are health and safety regulations and stuff around that sometimes mean that you can't do these things until you're over 18. Mm-hmm. But sometimes, even if it's at an animal sanctuary or any sort of animal related industry, veterinary practice, all of those kind of things will play into the fact that you've kind of explored and you've had hands-on practical experience. I think picking relevant college courses maybe to keep your options open, whether that's A levels, having it in mind what would be applicable to the animal degrees, or whether you want to go on a more practical based course and do sort of animal care and things at college. I think it's really playing to your strengths. This industry is really great at allowing people with all different strengths sort of equal access. You don't need to be the most academic to still make it in. You don't need to be the most practical to still make it in. If you are academic and you're research driven and based, there's a route in from that way. If you are practical based and you want to do sort of practical based college courses and just volunteer and get work placements, there's an equal route in. It's really good for that. So I think you've got to tailor it to your personality and your strengths, and then use one of those options that are there. Because apprenticeships, again, like I said earlier, internships, all those things, they are there sort of on offer, so you can do it.
No, that's brilliant, and it's really interesting to, as they sort of see that as you say, that there's, I don't want to use the word discriminate, but as you could say, to sort of say that everyone is on a level playing field. As you say, sort of, it doesn't matter whether you've got that academic edge or whether you've got that practical edge. As I say, you're sort of looking more sort of at the person, the way that their strengths can be sort of fully pulled out. Is that how I'm interpreting exactly. That right?
Exactly that. There is so many roles that require different sort of skill sets within this industry that it absolutely is about, like you said earlier, some sort of cool qualities that can then be utilized. So like I said, about just generally a passion for education, conservation and research, and you'll be able to find a way in, whether that is on the zookeeping front or whether that's in the conservation team or the research team, or even down to sort of the animal administrator route, where you're sort of dealing with all of our records and making sure animal records are up to date and everything like that. There's so many diverse roles here that you would still have an impact.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. And are those sort of kind of characteristics, when I say taken on board, so you mentioned earlier, say your keeper talks. So imagine you have a new keeper come on and they're clearly, how do I put it, they're clearly really good with a crowd. They're clearly really good at talking with people and really engaging. Are you more likely to then think, okay, it would be really good if we put you with, say put you on with a species that can be talked about. I'm worryingly thinking about this whole conversation. It's been a long time since I went to a zoo, so in my head I'm just thinking like, would you put them, as I say, sort of with the large insects where they can sort of physically hold them and interact with an audience, or would so if someone came in and they had that trait and those qualities, how would you direct them that way?
I think again, I don't think any particular role within zoos is sort of out of the reach for anybody. I think we've had some very nervous staff previously that have then gone and done a keeper talk and absolutely loved it and sort of never looked back. So I think you'd have to give everyone the opportunity to see whether they like these things. But obviously, like I said earlier, much the same as if you've got an interest in big cats and someone else has got an interest in birds, it makes sense to utilize those strengths. So if someone really did love a crowd, then absolutely, if they wanted to sort of take on the keeper talks or be involved in the keeper talks and the more experience based, it makes sense to use them for, because you're only going to give more satisfaction to them, more satisfaction to the guests, probably a better opportunity of learning for all involved. But I do think, even if keeper talks weren't something you really, really wanted to do, I think it's nice to try it because you never know. I mean, I was so nervous the first time I ever did a keeper talk, but now I actually quite enjoy it because, you just kind of get to spread the message, which is quite a satisfying thing once you've done it.
No, that's really interesting, and I'm guessing actually, I think you touched on it there. I'm guessing in this field in general, the trait of being willing and open to trying new things and learning things, I'm guessing that's probably one of the most key traits as well, as you've sort of said there, because as I say, you're probably going to get the opportunities to say work with all kinds of different kinds of species from different kind of backgrounds, and and as you sort of said earlier with the dentistry, there's all kinds of new things that we're learning about the animals and things we can sort of see and sort of test with them and those kind of things. So I'm guessing you need to be constantly open and willing to evolve and learn.
Yeah, I think there's a need for being open-minded and embracing change because it isn't a constantly evolving industry. If you look at it 50 years ago to now, it's a very different place. So I think, there's a need to kind of embrace change, challenge ideas, bring ideas forward. But there is a place for sticking to your guns and, sticking with what you believe in, because ultimately, like, it kind of, I don't know how to word it quite correctly, but sometimes, you've got to stay strong and say that, no, I believe in this and what we're doing now, because not all change is always good. So I think there's an element for being open-minded, but there's an element for sort of being realistic as well, and realizing that it's not always going to go your way. Sometimes it's not always going to be things you agree with, but you have to learn to constructively put that across so that everyone benefits from this.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, and I think that's not even just within this industry, but I think that's a really good approach to take across any industry. To be honest, I think it's a really solid piece of advice, and I think it was sort of just to round up really, and this is the sort of question I've asked all employers really. You sort of told us briefly a bit about your your route into your role and sort of your background. If you could go back now and speak to, say, I know, 17, 18-year-old Dan, you're fresh faced, you're about to head out on your career journey. Based on the experiences you've had, what is the one piece of career advice you'd give to your younger self?
One piece of career advice. I think it's very vague, but I would say stay focused on the end goal. There's lots of ups and downs. There's lots of hiccups. There's lots of things that don't always go your way. But just stay focused, invest in yourself, put the work in, be that in work or out of work, and just focus on where you want to get, not what's happening right now.